Right. Tonight I'm going to talk about a very important thing about. Thank you, everybody, joining me. I'm going to talk something very important regarding the knowledge of God and knowledge of ourselves. It is very, very important to understand who we are, to know who God is. This is very important because very often we are told to try to know who God is and find out who God is, etc. There's a lot of things being taught in the Bible about who God is, and there's no lack of material to do that. But what is lacking is our attitude in approaching God. You see, you can know everything in the world, all the theology in the world, but you will not do you one dime of good if your heart is not transformed, not changed. Because all the knowledge will just puff you up. But if your heart is not transformed, then it serves no purpose. However, the audience tonight I want to bring forward is really not so much of that because I think what I'm learning from my seminary and the books that I learn and read, especially from John Calvin, etc., are a huge blessing, and to me, it's so God-centered, and I want to be able to teach some of this stuff to anyone listening to this, and hopefully this will be a real encouragement and blessing unto you. And I will do another recording in Mandarin shortly after this. What I'm talking about, the knowledge of God and knowledge of ourselves are connected. John Calvin calls it the knowledge of God and knowledge of ourselves are connected. And want to talk about how they are related. Basically, Calvin says that if we don't know ourselves, we cannot know God. You know what that means? Because God is so glorious, so beautiful, so powerful. If we don't know ourselves, who we really are before God, it'll be very, very hard to come to God in the right frame of mind. And in fact, my biggest burden is that Christians begin to come to God and ask God for things and for blessings, primarily without the sense of piety and love for Him. So that's why it is so important. Okay, so it is so important to understand this. There are two parts of knowledge: the knowledge of God and the knowledge of ourselves. They are related. They are very related. And the thing is, which one comes first? That's a question. Which one should come first? Now because in the book of Acts, chapter 17:28, the Bible says that in Him we live and we move. In God, we move. That means we don't move outside of God. Everything is of God. The whole sharing is to try to make us to be so God-centered in our perspective, in our prayer, in everything that we do, that we are humble before God, and we know what kind of God He is and what we want to look for in Him. First of all, by knowing that who God is, we immediately know that we are so weak ourselves. You know, Abraham, when God visited him, he immediately threw himself down to the ground. He said, "I'm a sinner." Why did he suddenly say to him, a sinner? I'm a man of dust. Why did he say that? Because he saw God. He saw the glory of God. You know, in a sense, it's kind of related. If we don't see the glory of God, we will never see how depraved, how fallen, how broken we are. And you can turn it around the other side. If we do not know how broken we are, how much do we need God? How broken we are, we will never live in a frame of mind daily to be able to depend on Him on a daily basis. Our problem is when things are doing good, we tend to look beyond God. We forget God. We don't talk about Him so much. We come back to God when things are not doing too well. And that is no sanctification. There's no growth. The sanctification growth produces Christians who will daily rely on God all the time. But to rely on God all the time, you need to know who He is. Without knowing how powerful, how glorious He is, you will never have the attitude to rely on Him on a daily basis. And the other thing is, because we think ourselves so self-sufficient, and that's a big thing. Because we think we are so self-sufficient, we think we're self-knowledgeable, and we think science and everything provide answers and do all these things for us. We don't really need God. We are quite capable of running our own lives. And that's another thing. You see, when all these are put together, we have no capacity. There's no way for us to really know who God is. Unless we are. So we need to know that all the gifts we have, all the blessings we have, are not from ourselves. Get it clear in our heads. Even the money we make, even the career we build, even the children we bring to college and top schools, etc., and all that we could do, these blessings are not from ourselves. These blessings, indeed, our own very being is nothing but subsistence in the one God. Subsistence in the one God. Subsistence means we are totally rely in the one God. If God takes away anything, we are done. We're over. So the Bible also talks about the blessings of God, the providence of God. It's like dew from heaven, heavenly dew upon us. And the more we understand our poverty, our brokenness, the more we begin to realize the multitude of the glory, the multitude of benefits and blessings that reside with God, that stay in God, only God. When you look at the miserable ruin and the brokenness of the world around us today, and it's not hard at all, and you see the daily news, you hear that on the internet, and you see all these things that have so much brokenness. And I hope it does. I hope it does something for us. It begins to compel us to look to who God is. Where is God in all this stuff? You know, the rebellion of the first man, Adam, completely threw us into big problems. So we should learn humility. That's a big word. That's a really important word, that we should be aroused by fear, and we shall learn humility. You know, fear is a good thing. You know, when your hand touch something hot, you feel it's so hot, you put away your hand. There's an immediate reaction. Your body inbuilt mechanism to protect you from fire, from heat, from damaging your skin and your body. And that's a really good thing. You feel the pain, you pull it off. That is a good thing. And similarly, in our lives, in our daily lives, when we face fear or something, that is good, because it's telling you something is happening. You know, there's a fear of God. When things that are not so great happen into our lives, we have this fear of anxiety. You know, young people, millennials today, there's so much pressure and identity crisis and identity politics going on in the colleges, campuses, etc., that almost it is so natural. Even the counselors and in college campuses will counsel the students, the college kids, to take drugs, anti-anxieties, and seeking counselings because they have identity crisis. They don't know who they are. It is real. That will be another topic another day. But this is what we are. We are thereby, we are just like Adam and Eve. There's a shameful nakedness on him and on them, that there's so much infamy, so much problems that reside with us. Each of us therefore must be so stung by our consciousness of our unhappiness. When you are unhappy about your lives, there's the beginning of the search for God. There's the beginning of your journey trying to find who He is, where He is, etc. It is so easy just to go to church, to worship God, and things seem to be going pretty okay, pretty good, and you never go deep with God. It is when something is being shaken up, and then you're stung by your unhappiness, you want to attain to some knowledge of God. You know, from the feeling of our ignorance, our human poverty, our human vanity, our human infirmity, and what's more, our human depravity, our human corruption. We recognize the true light of wisdom and virtue and all kinds of abundance of good works and righteousness rest in God alone. Do you hear that? Human beings have all the evils in the world: wickedness, selfishness, greediness, what else? Poverty and depravity, which is a big one. Depravity, corruptions, and all this. When we are going through, when we see we are in such a boat, the problem is a lot of people don't even see themselves depraved. I'm talking to Christians as well. If Christians don't know themselves to be in a boat of misery and brokenness and depravity without God, we can never know who God is. We can never find God. We need to know. We would see the deplorable conditions we're in. You may be making a lot of money and the career is good and everything is good. You seem to be sailing and cruising in life. But that means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. The longevity in the eternity of things, the big scheme of things. Because actually, it blinds your eyes from seeing who you really are. That's why Christ says it's very hard for rich people to go into the kingdom of God. So we need to know that we are so depraved, broken, and corrupt and all this, so that we begin to realize that the true light of wisdom, virtue, goodness, the only goodness, everything, only good, the goodness only comes from God alone. Settle that in your mind. To the extent we are prompted by our ears to contemplate the good things of God. We cannot seriously aspire to come to God before beginning to become displeased with ourselves. You can never come to God fully without being displeased, unhappy about yourself. For what man in the world will not stay as he is? It's just called lethargic. It's called status quo. It's called comfort. It's called easiness. It's not just stay where it is. But there's a big, big problem. You know, if anyone, Christians and non-Christians, believers and non-believers included, I'm talking more towards the believers tonight. If believers are content with his own ability, giftings, and whatever his possessions, and either becomes ignorant and unmindful of his own misery, spiritual brokenness, emotional, and all this stuff, we are in big, big trouble. Without knowing this, we'll never know God. Therefore, the knowledge of God, the knowledge of ourselves, will arouse us to seek God. And we will find him by his hand. Thanks be to God, the God who the only goodness of our lives comes from the Father and Father alone. Amen.